Welcome to the Bible Savvy Podcast, a weekly conversation about how to understand, enjoy, and apply God's Word. It's time to jump into a new passage from the Bible Savvy reading plan.
Hey, everybody. I'm here with Pastor Courtney and Pastor David, and we did not plan our outfits today. David, what's our question for
Why is
this
green
episode?
the greatest color? All right, guys, it's March, and I was thinking, spring is coming / is it here? ? So the banter question this week is, in your mind, when does spring officially start? Like, what marks the beginning of spring for you?
Well, this is easy for me because
Oh, no.
this is a running podcast.
Yes. Yeah, I knew it. I knew it as soon as she said it was easy.
You definitely set me up. Outdoor track, people. You move it outside and it's spring.
Oh.
It's so easy. If
Wow.
you would just mark your seasons by the type of running that's happening, winter is indoor track, spring is outdoor track.
So is there like a week that they all move outside, or like the first?
Is it a
meet,
temperature
or like,
thing,
what
or is it like a...
It's usually, I mean, it's kind of a widely accepted, the meets move outside in the middle of March. That's what you do.
It just, even if it's still cold?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can still be cold. Like,
Yeah.
runners this is what we do.
Okay.
It's what we do.
All
We're
right.
hardy people.
Well, there you go.
David, what's your answer?
Mine is in the athletic realm, but it's March Madness. So the college basketball tournament. I just came from University of Kentucky doing campus ministry down there. Like the whole state revolves around, okay, when does the national college basketball tournament start? And usually that's around spring break for the students too. So in my mind, it was always like, oh, okay, selection Sunday, and then the first games are like, we're in spring. Like now we're rocking. So I'm sure it's the same for you, right, Clayton?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's what I'm really tuned in to all of that. My eyes did not glaze over at all while you were talking. March 21st. I can read a calendar. That's when it says the first day of spring. I mean, look, God made the planet to orbit the sun and to do all stuff. There's an equinox. It's built into the structure of the solar system. So I figure that's when it is. So there we go.
Science and research goes
There we
into your
go.
answer.
Of
Yes.
course.
I don't know.
Those are really predictable answers.
Honestly, like
actually.
emotionally, it feels like it after Easter. Because there's something about like, oh, it's Easter and it just feels nice or whatever. But Easter's late this year. So
Yeah.
I think it'll feel like spring before that.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's turn to our passage here. Matthew chapter 5. We are a couple weeks here into Matthew, and we are turning into one of the most important kind of sections of Matthew, which is the Sermon on the Mount. The way the book of Matthew is structured is there are 5 big blocks of teaching. Times when Jesus is sitting down with people and explaining something, kind of extended teaching. And Matthew has organized that deliberately to make to show Jesus to be like Moses. Moses wrote 5 books of the Pentateuch that we've been reading through this year. And Matthew says, let's gather Jesus' teaching into these 5 big chunks to show that he is the even greater Moses, the kind of new master teacher who's coming through. So the Sermon on the Mount, the first chunk that we get, is by far the most famous teaching of Jesus. If someone has not read the Bible, they have almost certainly heard phrases from this, probably multiple phrases from this. And if they know something about Jesus, if they know a quote from Jesus, it is very likely from this section of Scripture. So maybe not the part we're going to read today, but some part of the Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to dig into this. We're going to start in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, and go through verse 32.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, 'Rakah,' is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell. It has been said, 'Anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce.' But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery."
All right, let's go to the O in comma, which is observations. What do you guys see about this passage?
Well, Clayton, I think I'm on to you. It's almost like you planned for us to read Exodus and Leviticus and then talk about Jesus being the fulfillment of the law.
It might have crossed my mind.
Maybe. No, but seriously, I do think it's really cool coming out of Exodus and Leviticus and hearing Jesus say, "Hey, I didn't come here to abolish all of that. I came here to fulfill it. The fullness of the character of God exists in me right here, that is expressed through the law, and now I'm here." I just think it hits a little bit different after all the weeks we spent reading the law, and then Jesus saying, "No, I'm here."
Yeah, it is really deliberate to do that. Mostly because I just want people to have things in their mind, right? Sometimes we've heard it before or we've not come across it before, and we come across something and we didn't realize there was a connection there, and just bringing it together helps. I do also think this is a part that is challenging for people. I think some people have been told that here's what happened. There's the Old Testament, and God did a bunch of things there, and if you're curious about that, you can check it out. But He did away with all of that, and now He instituted something new. So all you need is what Jesus said, and after that, you can forget about all that. Mm-hmm. Jesus, in the very first kind of, the way Matthew structures it, like His first big public, like, let me tell you what I'm all about, the first thing He says, other than saying, here are the people who are blessed in my kingdom, is, I'm not throwing all that away. I'm completing it. I'm fulfilling it. I'm bringing it to its culmination. I'm actually saying, We're finally arriving where all of this was meant to go, and it's actually a celebration and an affirmation of all of those things. So we will never, you'll never hear us say, well, the Old Testament was bad and whatever, it's a good thing it's done away with. The reality is Jesus came to say, I'm all about all of that. And in fact, I'm the perfect expression of all of that. And let me teach you how to live out that way,
Yeah. It's that word fulfillment again, which I love. He came to fill it up full. And it was my first thing that I noticed, right, is just the idea that the law or the prophets, that's all of God's wisdom and teaching. And Jesus says, I haven't come to abolish them, but I came to fulfill them, to fill it up, to make it full. I was looking back and just thinking through, again, where does this relate in other places? And, in Hebrews, where it says those things are only a copy of what will come. Like, you think of an empty vessel and that Jesus fills it up.
Yeah.
Fulfills.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Sometimes we say, oh, it was a copy, so it wasn't that great. Well, it's like saying, no. like it was something that pointed to something that's even more than that was, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not like you're like, well, good thing we're past it. It's like actually you're getting the bigger, more intense version
you
of
just
it.
colored it in.
You're coloring
right?
it in,
It's like
right?
the black and white copy,
Yes.
and you just colored it all in.
Yeah. Now, figuring out how that all works is a challenging thing. So we're going to get Jesus gives several examples here of how he's fulfilling things in a way. But for a lot of us, it's very challenging when we read the Old Testament to say, how does this actually apply? What does this actually point to? And the image I always use with people is it's a little bit like a white light going through a prism. So the way white light has all the colors in it, right? But when it goes through a prism, it bends different wavelengths of color in different ways, some more than others. And the light that bends the most, that feels the most different, like in the law, there are certain things that goes through Jesus as the prism, and they change more significantly. So we don't worship in a temple anymore. We don't offer sacrifices anymore. Those things still have their meaning. They're still fulfilled in Jesus, but they're very, very different from how it felt to an Israelite. There are other wavelengths of light that don't bend quite as much. The principles still make sense. They're applied in a new context, that sort of thing. And others that seem to hardly bend at all, right? To not steal or whatever. It doesn't seem to be dramatically different in the old covenant and the new covenant. So it takes some wisdom and some understanding to know how those apply. But Jesus is saying it all comes through me and it all gets expressed in its fullness on the other side of me.
Yeah, that's cool. One of the repeated phrases is, you have heard that it was said, but I tell you. So 3 times just in these verses, we hear that, but he says it more times in the Sermon on the Mount as well. But this idea that, hey, if you know the law, this is what you heard. It's like, hey, you shall not murder. But then he says, but then I tell you that here's a further dive into the principle, the character of God behind this. And so he immediately, in the murder section, I mean, he really pulls out from like, okay, you're getting real specific about murder. He said, but I tell you, even if you're angry with a brother or sister, like that's getting at the core of what God is trying to teach his people to be, and that's a harmonious, unified people, and to fight for reconciliation. But it seems like people were so legalist about, well, I didn't murder them, which is a pretty low bar.
It's good enough.
Yeah, which my kids, I feel like they use that bar.
Yeah,
it's not that bad. I didn't kill her, but I feel like Jesus, just the repetition of that and the cadence of you've heard, but I tell you, is really unique.
Yeah. When you get to a place where it's so deep that it's like, just to be like, that idiot is not okay. and that's pretty convicting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's like a drive down Randall Road.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I had that image when I read this and I was like, oh, I feel so convicted.
It's the road rage passage. But there is something about saying it's got to go so deep that you do that. I also thought about this in terms of the general tenor of our culture. It's dismissive, right? Like we are looking to say, why can I write somebody off? This person is nothing to me, right? Like they're raka, they're worthless is what it would mean. And to say like that person's opinion or that person's culture or that person's whatever, like I'm gonna write them off. And I feel like most of our culture is half of the world is dead to me, right? Like they're fools, they're idiots, they're people I can't listen. I can't even understand why they think what they think. It's really close to home when you think, if you go, that idiot, like ask if you're okay,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I went back actually to my notes from just a couple of episodes ago when we talked about the law and where we talked about the underlying value of the law. I wrote the exact same note down, the underlying value of the law. It feels like Jesus reads the law and then he paints the picture. He like fills it out. It's kind of that, again, the idea of like, here it is, and then let me fulfill it. Let me fill it out. And getting into the heart of the matter in each one of these, and this is, jumping ahead a little bit, but he reads it. He says, you've heard that it was said, you shall not murder. But the heart of the matter is, do you value people? You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But the heart of the matter is, are you taking the dignity of another person away? You've heard it's been said, anyone who divorces his wife. That was, it's really protecting women kind of a passage, but really it's protecting people. There's an element of, protection there. And so for each one of those, when I saw that repeating phrase, I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to, he's talking about the law. What did we say about the law last time? We said there's a heart of the matter. There's an underlying principle. So what's the underlying principle in each one of these sections?
One of the underlying principles that caught me was in verses 23 and 24, where basically said, if you're offering your gift at the altar and you remember brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to him, then come and offer your gift. It feels strange to hear that Jesus, who is God, is saying, before you worship me, which anybody would probably think, no, worship of a deity would be more important to the deity. But Jesus says, no. If you have anything against someone, or someone has something against you, don't come and worship. Don't come and offer anything. Go and be reconciled. To me, it gets at like the heart and the truth about God is that he cares about, again, like you said, even last week when we were talking about genealogy, like God cares about individual people, not just what he receives, but also that we have reconciliation.
Well, and note the way it's worded was something that I noted. And there, remember that your brother or sister has something against you. You remember that you offended someone.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that punk over there, I'm going to go to them and confront them about what they did. No. It's like, if I have a little sense of, oof, I probably messed up on this. I probably did not value someone. That's a big deal. Like, it's on you. You go figure it out. And it says again, settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. It's not the person you're dragging into court. It's the person like who you offended against. Like, you better be pretty self-aware to figure this out.
Yeah. I'm looking at the next section that's talking about adultery and lust here. And it makes the principle, right? Okay, so, if you've looked lustfully, it's like committing adultery in your heart. But then it goes on to say, here's how you deal with that. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away, which is just a gross image, right? And then it repeats it twice. Like it does the same thing with the hand, but it has this phrase, it's better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to be thrown into hell. That's both striking and repeated, right? So those are the things we observe. And it's because we minimize the cost of sin and the damage of sin, and we say, this is not that big of a deal. And he's got to shock us into saying, actually it is. It's enough that, these are sobering things, but right, like if someone was going to war, or they were rescuing someone from a building, or they were doing something where they were like trying to save somebody or do something heroic, and we say they lost a limb in that, it's awful, it's difficult, but we would look at it and say it was worth it, right? You saved a baby from a burning building, but you lost a limb in the way. We'd mourn that, but we would say, absolutely, would you do it again? Well, that baby's alive, right? And we don't feel that way about our sin. That we say, this is killing us, right? This is degrading other people. This is corroding our community and our society. If I don't deal with it in me, enough that I would say, I'll gouge out an eye, I'll cut off a hand. Now, obviously, Jesus isn't recommending this for your average case, but he's saying, if you don't take it that seriously and do those kinds of drastic things, maybe you don't actually understand. It's better to destroy that part of you than have all of you destroyed at judgment, right? So there's a weightiness that we just don't feel, and he's got to shock us into it.
Yeah. The overall emotional tone of Jesus' words here, I just kept picturing like the word ruthless. Like, how ruthless are we willing to get with sin? When Jesus is saying, hey, I get it, you didn't murder, but you still called the guy an idiot on Randall Road, and you still let your eye wander towards that attractive person at Starbucks, and he's like, hey, we got to get ruthless with this stuff. Like there's an aggressive side to this that just before this, he's in the Beatitudes, he's saying, blessed are those, blessed. There's like almost like a gentler tone about it, and then it's like, okay, let's hone in on some of these things. And he says, because one of the things he says in Matthew 5:4 is, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I connect this passage right back to 5:4 and say, what does it look to mourn over your sin? It looks like getting ruthless and cutting out the hand or gouging out the eye and being ruthless.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to make one comment for people who we're talking mostly to the people who are too casual about their sin. There's probably a handful of people that are very like self-critical about their sin. And some of it goes to a place where they're probably accusing themselves when there's not a problem. So this is maybe a smaller subset, but I feel like it's worth saying. Anger and sexual desire is not what Jesus is condemning. It is how it's directed and how it's used. So there are things in life that will cause anger to rise. Anger is an appropriate response to injustice, but the problem is we get injustice so wrong, right? Like we feel like there's so many unjust things or things that we should be angry about that we let it rise for the wrong things and we stoke it, right? So in those moments when you're like, oh, I feel offended by that, what do you do with that, right? Same thing with sexual desire. It's a good gift that God gave us. It's the entertaining that, like the looking lustfully. It's the going there in your mind that we're talking about. So the person who's like, I don't know, every time I feel sexual desire, every time I recognize someone as attractive, like this is a problem. Well, no, but what you do after that, where you go with that is where it is. So there's some people who are saying, I don't know what to do. Jesus is so strict. I never feel like I can be okay. I am speaking to some of you to say that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the last section here with divorce. What do you guys see in that area?
I think, again, one of the things I noticed is it is a protection, seems to be protection of the woman. It even talks about making her the victim of adultery. It's another one of those passages where it talks about like, you're the offender, and to be aware of that, that there is a victimization that happens there. And, that was just something that stuck out to me, that it just seems to be such a protection and such a like valuation of people within that. And again, pointing out, you make her the victim of adultery.
Yeah.
There's some helplessness in there. And we know that Jesus takes care of people who feel helpless. So
yeah. So some of worth noting is in ancient culture, in Jewish culture in particular, in some cultures this could happen, but in Jewish culture, it was men who initiated divorces, and it wasn't the women didn't have the right to do that. It's different in a few other Greco-Roman contexts, but in this context, it would always be the man saying, "You displease me, so you can go." It wouldn't be the woman. So in our culture, we think, well, this could be either party. The other thing is there was a debate about how, like, what criteria you could use, like what would justify divorce, and the rabbis were looking at a passage in Deuteronomy where Moses says, okay, if something happens and here's how you initiate a divorce. And Jesus says, this is like meant to be an exception for the fact that our hearts are hard and things go wrong. But the debates were, could a husband do this for any and every reason, right? Like, it's just up to him. He's displeased with her and he could send her away. Or other rabbis were saying, no, this is strict. It's just talking about sexual immorality. And so Jesus clearly sides on that way of saying there's only there's a limited number of conditions where a divorce is permitted, even if it's not desirable, and it's saying sexual immorality.
Yeah. There's actually a series of, I'm sure you know this, of videos on Sermon on the Mount from the Bible Project.
Yeah,
really well done.
Yeah,
that goes through this section specifically, and the imagery is beautiful. It shows these, golden threads kind of attaching a husband to a wife and what that would look like, the tug that would feel, and when it would be permissible, things like that. So just a recommendation of a resource. For me, that was a really good visual.
Yes,
to see
it
that.
is.
Yeah, and I think my observation here, reading the kind of adultery part right before this and then reading the divorce together, a little bit of, when we read the Sermon on the Mount, it can be really easy to like take the sections and just read the section and think about that section. But reading them together, to me, it unlocked kind of a thought of God seems to be raising the honor of marriage here. Yeah. Because if you look at them in tandem, it's like, hey, looking at a woman lustfully is on the level of adultery. Like this is level of like cheating, and this is not your spouse, and this is not, you don't just unleash the sexual desires, you said. And then it's, hey, and when you just treat marriage flippantly, like, oh, I'm happy today, so I guess you can stay around, and then I'm unhappy tomorrow, you're gone. Again, he seems to be elevating, saying marriage is an honorable thing that we're going to treat not haphazardly, like I just, lust after this person, divorce this person. But he's like, no, think about this more the way that the Lord thinks about this, in terms of the love and the sacrifice and the serving of one another, instead of just a flippant attitude or dismissive culture, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And you think about, I mean, you mentioned it's protective of women. We don't think through, I mean, if you've encountered someone gone through a divorce, and it can be absolutely brutal, economically devastating, all the rest. That's hard in our culture where both spouses can go and get a job, right? Like, so if a man is the primary income and they get divorced, their wife can still go out and get a job and take care of herself. It's tragic, it's difficult or whatever, but it's within a framework in our culture where it makes sense. In this culture, a woman who gets divorced has to find another family, another man who has land or income or whatever to be provided for. So if it's easy for someone to be tossed aside, you absolutely ruin that person's life in a way that isn't on the same scale even as what happens when divorce ruins a life in our culture. So it really is pretty devastating. I will add one thing, just because I know this is a question that people come up. It's not in this passage. Sometimes people say, okay, is sexual immorality the only reason someone can get a divorce? And even within the pages of the Bible, there's an additional situation. So in 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul is talking about a situation, and it's a situation that Jesus is not addressing in this section. It's a situation where someone comes to faith in Christ and their spouse is not a believer, and their spouse says, well, if you're going to follow Jesus, I don't want you anymore. Like, you're gone. And Jesus and Paul is saying, here's what you do in that situation. And he says, look, if your unbelieving spouse wants to still be married to you, stay married to them. Do not break that off. That's not a reason for divorce. But if they abandon you, so if your spouse says, for whatever reason, I don't want to be married to you, that abandonment is an additional reason why someone could get a divorce according to Scripture. And so it's very clear that Paul is thinking about another situation that Jesus wasn't addressing in this passage, saying there are other covenant-breaking activities that make it so that a divorce could happen, and there could be someone who is the victim of that divorce and therefore not sinning when their spouse commits that sin against them. And so around here, we've tried to spell that out in a couple of ways, where we talk about a legitimate divorce, permitted, not desirable, but permitted divorce, is a situation where a spouse has abandoned their spouse, or when someone has been abandoned in all but proximity, right? So someone could be living in the same house, but through abuse, through the way they're treating someone, it can be essentially checking out of that marriage. The covenant relationship is no longer there. And so we summarize it as adultery, abandonment, or abuse are the criteria for a legitimate divorce. And so there are people who've been through those sorts of situations, and they look at these things and say, oh no, is God, is this hanging over my head forever? And we want to say clearly, no, we weep with you, but you do not have to have guilt over those things. On the other hand, there are situations where people, for any and every reason, might get a divorce. And the Bible's saying, no. This is something that you're still obligated to and you've got to reckon with. And so we told this line of saying we want to be helpful and gracious to people who are the victims of divorce. And we also want to hold a high view of marriage that says divorce is not something that we just casually enter into, and there are consequences with that. So it's this interesting line that we've got to take.
Good.
All right, let's talk about one of the M's in comma. Let's talk about meditation here. Let's take a moment here to prayerfully ponder this verse 17. Jesus says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. All right, let's talk about the other M in comma. Let's talk about message. What principle do you guys get out of this passage?
I am going simple this time because my message was just that Jesus came to fulfill the law. that I love that phrase, and I will admit, watch the Bible Project video. I kind of got it from there, but the idea of filling it full, I love that idea of fullness, and that Jesus came to fill it up. That image of, filling in the lines, kind of fulfilling means making it whole and full. And there's something really beautiful about that. And to think of Jesus as a fullness, as the fullness of, is such a different concept than abolishing. I think we lose something when we think of it that way. But to really let that sink in, that Jesus came to fulfill the law.
That's good. My message was Jesus invites us to treat sin as ruthlessly as he did on the cross. I think Jesus presents a case here to not letting sin linger, whether that's public sin or private sin. And he himself was willing to do whatever it takes to eliminate sin. Like, he gave his life for us. Talk about gouging out eyes and cutting off hands is a gruesome imagery, but Jesus' death on the cross was a gruesome death. He was willing to do whatever it takes to eliminate or the penalty of sin in our lives. So I think he's inviting us to treat sin as ruthlessly as he did.
My message is this: there's nothing wrong with the law except for us. And what I'm getting at there is all of the ways when Jesus says, okay, you've heard this, but I tell you this, he's deepening it, and he's saying, here's the real issue. It's not that this rule was a bad rule or this was unwise or whatever. It's that you haven't let it sink deep enough into your heart that you live it from the core. And so the real problem with the law is not the laws, but us. All right, let's talk about the A and comma application. What do we do in light of all this?
Yeah, my message was that Jesus came to fulfill the law. And it's interesting kind of what you said in your message, Clayton. One of the things I wrote down was, if the law changes us, it fills us full. And so the idea of how do I take these things and take it deeper, find the underlying value of the law. And, I'm going to be honest, I'm really convicted by my driving on Randall Road sometimes. So it was a
safe place.
Good reminder. I am confessing to all of the Bible Savvy Nation right now that I have those moments, those feelings where I am not valuing someone. And if they cut me off, though, come on. But it is just one of those, in all things. Am I living as someone who believes this? Am I living as someone who believes that Jesus came as a fulfillment of the law? Do I understand what that matters, or what that means, and what difference that makes? Am I getting to the heart of the matter, which is where the fullness comes from? Am I operating out of a fullness and an overflow and the idea of fulfillment? There's a filling there, and am I operating as someone who lives out of that overflow of the heart? And am I valuing people? Am I, giving people the dignity that they deserve? Am I a protector? Am I someone who protects people? Or am I someone who flippantly says, you fool, to the guy on Randall Road?
That's good. My message was, Jesus invites us to treat sin as ruthlessly as he did on the cross. So my application is to keep meeting with my accountability partner for confession and prayer. I think the reason sins like uncontrolled anger, because I can confess my road rage on Randall Road with you, Courtney. You're not alone.
Thank you. It's a support group now.
But the reason these sins like uncontrolled anger or lust exist in the lives of Christians is because we're just not willing to gouge the eye out. And I think one of the ways that we can practice that is by sitting with a trusted brother or sister in Christ and saying those things out loud and asking for prayer. I think that's a very easy application of being ruthless and naming those things to someone as by way of confession. I think Jesus said he's here to heal the sick, and how do you do that? Sometimes it's through surgery and a scalpel, and so sometimes you need a cut in order to get the infection out. And I think that's what community and that's what confession and prayer over one another really is. So we have to be willing to cross that pain threshold of confession to take our sin as seriously as Jesus did on the cross.
Yeah. Yeah. As I hear you say that, I think about people that I've known that have given up things that feel really painful. Like, it's not just the confession, but if you're talking about lust and you're saying, all right, here's what I need to do. I need to cancel my streaming services, or I need to not have access to the internet outside of work hours, or whatever it is, it feels like cutting off an arm sometimes. It seems so absurd to be like, I got off social media because it was tempting me. and yet that, as painful and absurd as that feels, that's what a lot of people need. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So there's, in some ways, there are real painful sacrifices. My message was that there's nothing wrong with the law except for us. And so the application is to let Jesus teach the law to my heart. That I think I just settle for I'm getting by, right? And to really desire to say, no. Like true transformation is where this is headed. And some of it is just remembering, like, no, one day we will get there, right? In heaven, it really will be. We feel like, oh, it's just impossible. It doesn't, whatever. So we don't even aim at saying, no, really, from the heart, could I mean this? Could I really be the sort of person who values people and shows dignity to people and isn't selfish in the way that I think and look at people and all that, right? Like we just assume I'm kind of stuck that way, rather than saying, Jesus, no, I want you to teach it to me, not just in my behavior, but in my heart. That I'm actually that sort of person who over time is less prone to that reaction, you know? It's interesting when we talk, we joke about road rage and whatever, and there is a genuine like need to do what's right there. But sometimes we feel like, okay, look, if I get a little angry on the road, that's okay. What if I'm not angry in other places? But that's actually not true. Like the fact that we tolerate, that we say, I can get really ticked off at somebody that that passed me on the road, is the sort of thing that says to your heart, it's okay to harbor just a little bit of that anger. And it then does come out in places where it feels like a more significant relationship. You've kept a little reservoir of that there. And to say, no, that reservoir, Jesus, I need you to clean it out.
Yeah. Let him fill it up.
Let him fill it up. That's right.
Dump it out and
Dump it out and fill it up. That's where we go.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Join us again next Monday for a new episode where we'll be looking at another passage from the Bible Savvy reading schedule. And in the meantime, if you're not following along with the reading plan, check out BibleSavvy.com. Also, you can subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Email us your questions or suggestions at podcast@BibleSavvy.com. Lastly, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next week.